If you've learned anything about rich white girls online, it's that they can sometimes be deeply unreliable narrators of the lives they lead. That matters, and as somebody who wants to see more Black women be rich, more people in this country actually have power and agency to lead good, safe lives, that's something we can get into. And understanding the stories that people tell about themselves helps us understand the system we're all working in. Using art to break down the inner workings of American royalty, it's not new. That's in the lifeblood of work from Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, and even Shonda Rhimes. And in 2014, when E. Lockhart's book, We Were Liars, first hit bookshelves, it was immediately pounced on as film and television gold. It stands out in the genre because it's not really like Succession or The Perfect Couple, and that's due to a choice E. Lockhart made many years ago. It's one she felt pulled to as a young woman getting her doctorate in English at Columbia University. Choosing to get you to see the emotional core of this Sinclair family inside the book, and to have you both be horrified and enamored by each member of the family, it's at the core of what master novelists in the 19th century would do with their characters. And it's this summer of 2025 that after many false starts, reiterations, the script being passed back and forth, we finally arrive on Beechwood Island through Amazon Prime. We too are welcome to this private island called Beechwood off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. And we settle in for the unwinding mystery of this American royalty, this family that E. Lockhart has created. We Were Liars has remained in the top 10 streaming shows since it's dropped, and 11 years later, that horrifying plot twist at the end remains intact. You're safe here because I am not going to spoil it for you at all. But we are going to look at how the conceit of this show helps give us an antidote to the romanticization of the old money aesthetic. And of course, the manners that surround it that end up keeping us less powerful. Part of what makes this series so powerful is that it stems from the fact that E. Lockhart never meant to write a novel in the first place, especially not this one. And this is the girl in question that we're going to spend a lot of time with, Cadence Eastman Sinclair. And the thing is, the crux of this drama is not in how does she have power or does she have power? She doesn't have a choice. She was born into it. As her mom later says, it's hard to be a Sinclair, but I bet it's even harder to not be one. The question is not how does she obtain power, it's what kind of story is she going to tell about her power and which one of those will she commit to. Now, you might not be the daughter, the granddaughter of Harris Sinclair, a publishing magnate, but you might share with this family, the children at least, their naivete and their ignorance about the power that they have. Whether Candace is ignorant or innocent about her power, about her station in life, that's a whole other video. But what is not at question is the fact that the adults in the room, they continue to shroud and hold back knowledge, not to be polite to other people, but to maintain power over them. E. Lockhart's original goal was to teach students about novels, not write them herself. But then she studies 19th century English literature, and she realizes that this rise of this form of literature called the novel changes how people are interacting with their society to some level, or at least how they see themselves. The novel in the Victorian era created a space where normal, ordinary people could look at these stories and talk to the stories that built the society they were in. E. Lockhart realized she didn't want to necessarily talk about the power of these novels behind a lectern, but she wanted to place these stories herself into readers' hands. The kind of story that could end up on screens everywhere. E. Lockhart herself grew up as a scholarship kid, and she saw what happened when she was able to access these elite institutions and these whole worlds with opportunity that had previously been closed to her. This American ability to remake oneself has crossed over with some of the focus of the 19th century authors in terms of being able to use social drama to critique the culture they were in. In that period, the Empire of Britain was financially dominant, but also shifting under the rise of industrialization. People's old relationship to the middle class, the ruling class, power itself was something that was under examination. New technology meeting old power will do that to a country. Candace's experience on Beechwood Island and the twin mysteries that haunt the entire family, they're about shifts in power that are silenced, interpersonal dynamics and relationships that are not talked about. And this is high stakes because the story she tells about the past is going to determine the family's collective future. You are currently living in America that's reworked itself on several occasions. First, we had a democracy that pretty much only worked for land-owning high-class men. Then we have this democracy that's being forced increasingly to include other Americans and people. We have this long history where we've ignored the way that there was a strategic plan to keep wealth and power out of the hands of Black and brown and immigrant people while still reaping from their intellect and labor. We have followed rules that say don't talk about money or class because it's rude. But it's not rude to talk about. It's just inconvenient. And I'll be blunt with you. You already know this. You need money to access a Black doula. You need money to move your kid out of that place. We need money to represent snatched up immigrants who are not getting due process. Us having money is how we pay for refugees who are amputees who were once under siege to get help. That freedom, that power, we have to intentionally plot for it. And now, as American oligarchy solidifies itself, this scramble for resources, this scramble to understand what's going on, it has intensified. How do you find safety in a society that refuses to talk about caste and class? You don't, so you have to talk about it. Because what would happen if we told out loud the story about American wealth? Are Black people really lazy and not willing to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, or have they systemically faced economic violence? Are Indigenous communities truly rich with their reparations when up to the 1970s, their generations of children were being snatched from them through US government sterilizations? Do people like Jeff Bezos and his friends earn their wealth, or do they steal it? Might we consider the way the hollowing out of the American middle class might have a reckoning that's coming to a beach house near you? Additionally, your ability to spot invisible power, to spot the stories people use to obscure how they use it or wield it, it helps you determine what advice is good for you and what advice is not good for you. For example, someone who talks about being a Black venture capitalist, but does not disclose that the generational wealth and capital they got in the first place came from a banking family, that's not going to help you that much. Unless that's literally your situation, but in that case, okay. We should take with a grain of salt people who can take calculated risks because the Klan didn't burn down their family's collateral. You've probably had a good bit of times where you're looking at someone's career path and you're trying to figure out how they did it, and then you realize, oh, they just have a safety net under their tightrope. And sometimes these people, they're not helpful themselves because they're unreliable narrators about their process. They have some shame about the fact that the road's been a little smoother for them. And this is not to dismiss the emotional work and the way you have to still put yourself out there, no matter if you have people backing you or not. Everyone to some degree still has to overcome fear, but some people are doing this work without any kind of safety net. And we should disclose who has safety nets under their tightrope and who does not. If we want more people to have safety nets through the care and the collective work of the community, we have to be open about the kind of power we're inheriting. And again, we're not alone in breaking all this down. Charles Dickens and Jane Austen's work has remakes almost every few years. Their work has remained in our collective consciousness. The books are still selling like hotcakes. They're being taught in schools to this day. And they captivate new generations just like they did back then. Both Charles Dickens and Jane Austen were key observers and articulators of the power that they saw around them, the way that the social class was wielded to keep the status quo. And they used story to cut through the story about power itself. We Were Liars works in that tradition because none of this is new. E. Lockhart even tips her hat to this background of hers and this knowledge by mentioning Wuthering Heights strongly several times. And that was brilliant because depending on who tells Emily Bronte's story, Wuthering Heights, you see different things. Is Heathcliff, this young, dark, ambiguous man on the outskirts of this family and this society, a threat to the tender white flesh of the protagonist? Some don't go there, obscuring the race relations and politics inherent in this story. Candace herself finds herself asking about her parents, about Harris Sinclair himself, if these people's actions line up with their words. And then, scary enough, she has to ask the same thing about herself. Wealth, just like the fiction of Beechwood Island, is typically understood and transmitted through fairy tales. But realizing who is narrating the fairy tale matters. If you narrate Manifest Destiny by the colonizers, you get a very different story than the one maybe told by the Black freed Seminoles. The story of a Black billionaire could cut two ways. Maybe it's about a radical change that's come across society, or it's an individual person who's navigated a cutthroat system that hasn't changed at all. As we follow Cadence as she tries to go back and remember what the heck happened in summer 16 on Beechwood Island, we realize with her that maybe the first and second story is not one we can trust. No lie, no exaggeration, I gasped audibly when I watched that final episode, to the point where someone walked in the room and was like, what's wrong? There is so much here for us to learn and talk about, and I'm excited to hear what you think about this series. Because telling the truth about power and knowing how to spot it is how we help each other. And one last warning, piece of advice, I will advise you to do what the cast, crew, and the author herself have asked. If anyone asks you about the plot twist, the story, or what actually happened, you just need to lie.